Nobody had previously spotted that. It was just me. I actually grew up with the fireworks displays on this very site when I was a little kid. And I learned to swim at Cocktail Swimming Pool just around there. And then basically, after I got my degree in economics, I decided to become a TV reporter, but specialising in business and economics. So for years and years, I was mainly doing businessy interviews. And at the same time, because of that, that got me really interested in investing. So right from about the year 2000, I started getting into it. So the dot-com boom was when I first got heavily into investing. And actually, funnily enough, I hope he doesn't mind me saying, the man at the back of the room there, Alan Layton, was somebody who I interviewed 20 years ago when he was chairman of lastminute.com. And I was so excited. I didn't tell him that when I met him earlier, but I was so excited to meet somebody who was in charge of one of these big dot-com companies that were going to take over the world. Some of them did, some of them didn't so much, but at the time, it felt very, very similar to the kind of crypto boom that we're experiencing right now and have been for sort of the past few years. And I got heavily into buying dot-com shares, not lastminute.com as a matter of fact, but some of the others. And I chose so perfectly these companies that were going to go to the moon, as the crypto people like to say now. And they didn't go to the moon, the ones I bought, unfortunately. They went to zero. And I carried on buying all the way down because my friends, who were my personal tipsters, who assured me that everything was going to go wonderfully, they basically insisted that every time the price went down, I should buy some more. You know, you average down, you average down, you average down. That was the only phrase they knew back then. You average down. So I kept averaging down until I lost all of my savings, like all of it. There was one share in particular that I was heavily invested in called Gameplay. And I'd even been to their offices, which were really cool at the time. They were kind of like Google is now. You imagine people kind of skateboarding around and playing on old-fashioned like arcade machines and that kind of thing. In the offices, they had like a huge block in London, all to themselves, floor after floor. So they really felt like they were going places, but it was all smoke and mirrors. It was all illusions. So that gave me a pretty good grounding for being skeptical about cryptocurrency when it came along, obviously. The worlds are kind of quite similar in that way. So what happened was, just to give you a quick potted history, I haven't used PowerPoint today because I just, we've only got half an hour, so I'll be reasonably quick in going through all this stuff. So in 2007, I was sort of a bit of ahead of the curve and saw that there was probably a major crash coming. I wasn't the only person to think that. I mean, for God's sake, there was Northern Rock had just collapsed. You remember, with everybody all queuing around the corners? That was 2007 that happened. But the stock market didn't actually collapse until about 6 months to a year later it started collapsing. So actually we all had a lot of warning that things were not right. But of course, all the bankers who I was interviewing, were sort of the heads of Barclays and all the rest of it, who I was interviewing for my job at ITV, they were all saying, no, it's all blowing over, everything's fine. Everybody is perfectly capitalized and we haven't got anything to worry about. These subprime problems in America, it's just a blip. Well, it just makes me annoyed thinking about it now because history just repeats itself over and over again. We always get the reassurances from the people who are in charge of things, but they know secretly. You can see it in their eyes when you stop interviewing them. You turn the camera off and suddenly their eyes change and they no longer have that confidence anymore. So I could kind of tell something was awry, but I didn't have any kind of inside track as to that the subprime thing was really going to collapse. So I basically set my targets in the market. I set my stops, as it were, so that I would start shorting using spread betting platforms, the ones that some of you might have used, IG.com, CNC Markets, all the usual suspects. And I was able to start shorting at the right time. I waited until things really started going over the edge. And once the trend was with me, once the ball was started rolling downwards, I got in right there as the ball was just starting. And so I made a lot of money and I was able to well, I wrote an article for the Times talking about how I turned £3,000 into £100,000. Obviously, you know, you've got to remember that £3,000 was all at risk. I mean, I could have lost that at any moment. So there was there was some luck involved there. And with that sort of extra money that I had at that time, I was then able to sort of start investing and trading more properly. And by 2012, I was making more money from investing than I was from my job. So I decided to jack in the job and start doing it full time. And I've basically been making almost all my income ever since from investing and trading. You notice I talk about investing and trading as sort of slightly different things to each other. And I'm going to focus more on the long term here today, because you know this whole day is really about more the investory side, more about sort of getting in and then trying to stay in for the long haul. Here's the thing with cryptocurrencies. I discovered Bitcoin and like we all did, we heard about it in the news, and I started trading it in about 2014 was the first time that I bought Bitcoin. But like everybody else at that time, it felt like a bit of a house of cards. It felt, well, I wasn't going to put too much of my money in it because, frankly, at that time it was like handing over money for a handful of magic beans. You know, is this ever going to come to anything? Who the hell knows? It was one of those kind of situations. But I gave it a shot, and I did some trading, and I made some money as it started doing well. Now, when I really got interested was when the other cryptocurrencies came along. Ethereum was the first sort of post-Bitcoin cryptocurrency. And what I find really interesting from that moment on was that suddenly I recognized the area that I was trading. With Bitcoin, it's like it's a new currency. Maybe one day it'll take over from other currencies, or maybe it won't. And there's all these regulatory issues to consider. Will the regulators squash Bitcoin flat? I mean, that's still a major question. Even now, because last week, Gary Gensler, who is the in charge of the Securities Exchange Commission, the main regulator in the States, was saying words to the effect that there was no way that on his watch these things were going to be allowed to continue unregulated. They would be brought within the existing financial funds, crucially, not that they are going to invent new rules for the cryptocurrencies that suit the cryptocurrencies and trading of them, but they're going to be kind of shoehorned into the existing rules for shares and commodities. And without going into too much detail, frankly, that could spell pretty bad news for Bitcoin. So there have always been major clouds on the horizon for Bitcoin. And that's why I've always been a bit hesitant about it as a sort of ultra long-term investment, because frankly, it's at the mercy of people like this bloke Gary and some other blokes around the world. It's up to them whether it survives or not ultimately, and who the hell knows what's going on in their minds. So that's not much use. But what I really loved about Ethereum when it came along, it was called, back then, people don't really call it this anymore, but back then people used to call it the world computer, because Ethereum is more than just a cryptocurrency. It's more than just an alternative currency. It's an entire kind of operating system on its own. It's like a whole new Windows kind of thing. And you can have numerous apps built on top of Ethereum, right? Ethereum is a platform for other cryptocurrencies to build projects upon. And what's more, most of those projects have absolutely nothing to do with currency or finance. The dominance of Bitcoin kind of makes people feel this whole thing is about alternative currencies, but it's actually not. You've got to get that out of your mind. And you've got to realize that when you invest in most cryptocurrencies, what you're really investing in is an early tech startup. That's basically what they are, all of them. It's like, I mean, how many of you here are AIM investors who have invested in the AIM market in the past? Yeah, quite a lot of you. Well then, if you haven't gone into cryptocurrencies, and you do get into cryptocurrencies, you'll very quickly feel like this is a familiar world to you, right? AIM shares are not dissimilar to cryptocurrencies. I guess the main difference is that cryptocurrencies have allowed ordinary investors to get in right at the earliest stage, at the kind of stage where people like Alan at the back there would be able to get involved in a new tech project long before the rest of us do, even before it would hit the AIM market. Cryptocurrencies are kind of like that. From the very moment a project is invented, you are able to kind of stake your claim to its future. Now, it's not a perfect analogy, because shares, if you buy them on the market come with rights to possibly a share of future profits, for example. Whereas with cryptocurrencies, you don't necessarily get a share of any future profits. In fact, most of the time there aren't any profits as such, and there aren't any revenues, which makes it extremely difficult to value them in fundamental terms in the same way that you would an AIM share. So instead, the kind of due diligence that you have to do with cryptocurrencies is the sort of less financial way of doing it, where you look at the team. You start off by going to the website of the cryptocurrency and see, right, who's in charge of this? Who's the person who has actually set it in motion? How much experience do they have in the tech industry? Have they run any very successful projects in the past, even before cryptocurrency came along? Were they running successful tech projects? That's the kind of thing that you want to see in the top people. You also want to know about the software developers, because they are an extremely important part of any cryptocurrency. You want to know who is the person who they've hired to be in charge of the software development side of things, and how good are they, crucially. What's their experience? What are people saying about them on GitHub, which is sort of like a little talking shop slash code repository for people who are very heavily into tech, and they post code on GitHub, and they also have conversations amongst themselves about the code. So this is the kind of, it's like a whole new kind of due diligence that you have to do, but as I say, it's within the same kind of world as investing in AIM stocks and doing your due diligence on those. Where the similarity, I think, is strongest is that when you invest in an AIM stock that doesn't yet have profits, and maybe not even revenues, if you're going for, say, an oil and gas play where they're going to go and do some discovering of oil or gas, and you don't know whether they're actually going to find the oil or gas or not, but they say they're looking in vaguely the right place, so you go, okay, the share price is rising steadily, there's clearly some inside buying going on from what I'm hearing, I'm going to give it a punt. It's kind of that kind of thing, to some degree, right? Because even if you heavily believe in the technology behind a particular cryptocurrency, you have to understand that there is still a very large chance that something could scupper it along the way up. So it's important to invest, to basically diversify amongst cryptocurrencies. The entire cryptocurrency market tends to move as one, though. So this is something to be very aware of, is that they all tend to follow Bitcoin. And they all go up when Bitcoin goes up, and they all go down when Bitcoin goes down. So I made my reputation such as it is in crypto in 2017. You remember there was that big crypto boom, and the price got to $20,000 at its peak. And then I publicly said on my Facebook page, which had grown quite large, I was able to tell my 250,000 followers, I think, in all probability, we've reached the top of the market and just past the top of the market. I can't be sure, because you can never be sure. You can never be sure. Nobody knows the future, but it seemed to me very much that way. So I gave them that warning. I got out. The price of Bitcoin crashed by 85%, and the prices of most other cryptocurrencies fell by between 95 and 99%. Right? So you have to bear that in mind as an investor in cryptocurrencies. You don't really, even if you think of yourself as a long-term investor, you don't really want to be losing 95% of your money every couple of years. Or I don't. Anyway, maybe you do. Maybe you're prepared to sit through 95% drawdowns. Personally, I'd rather go with the major cycles. And at the moment in cryptocurrencies, the cycles tend to last around 3 to 5 years. So you're kind of getting in at the ground level, which is what I do each time. I buy some projects that I believe in and that I hope will come to fruition during the kind of mania part of the cycle. And then when the trends start to turn, exactly like the 2007, 2008 peak, you know, people say you can't time the market, but that's bullshit because you can. But you know, I don't time the market, I don't time every little correction up and down, because that way lies madness. For most people, some people are very good at it, but you know, these little corrections here and there and up and down, I can't be doing with any of that. But I am perfectly happy to time the major corrections, the big ones, the ones that come along, you know, the big bull turns to a bear market, and then bear market turns to a bull market. In the stock market, that happens less often, maybe only once every decade. In cryptocurrency, it happens more quickly. But as I say, if you don't want to lose 95% of your money each time, it's important to try and catch those turns each time. So, how do you go about it? How much time have we got left? We have, we've got quite a lot of time left. I'm talking very fast. So good. So I can talk you through it. Right, this is what I do. If I'm interested, right, I want to find a new cryptocurrency. Which cryptocurrency shall I invest in? We're at the bottom, not at the bottom of the market, but I'm seeing the faint, the signs of hope. I'm seeing the shoots, the new green shoots growing at the end of a bear market. I want to get into some cryptocurrencies. Which ones am I going to buy? So what I did last time, for example, was I kept my ear to the ground. I was reading on websites like CoinDesk, Cointelegraph, and Decrypt, D-E-C-R-Y-P-T. Those are probably the three main news sites for cryptocurrency. But as well as news, they do analysis. A lot of it is nonsense. A lot of it is kind of price analysis. The MACD has crossed blah blah level. The RSI is above 70. You might have seen this kind of stuff in trading talk. Most of it's worse than useless. So don't worry about any of that stuff. But read the articles about cryptocurrencies, ones you haven't heard of before. What are they doing? What's this project all about? Oh look, there's a new project that hopes to replace the entire taxi industry. How on earth is it going to do that? Well, the idea is that they have a piece of code that runs itself. So instead of having Uber as a massive profit-taking company in the middle of the taxi industry, taking say 20 to 30% of all the money that is spent on taxis, instead you just have a computer program that runs itself. But how can this work, you say? What if we have problems and so on? This is how cryptocurrencies work. They are self-regulating pieces of code. They have people behind them in customer services for emergency situations and where things go wrong legally that need to be resolved by a human being. But those cases are relatively rare. Most of the time, for a taxi app, as an example, the taxi app would simply put drivers together with passengers. And this has already actually been attempted in several cities around the world, in South America in particular. But so far it hasn't taken off because the problem is that every time they try it, the local regulators stamp on them hard, having learned hard lessons from Uber, who of course, Uber's way of doing it was simply to just march into the city, set up their app and go, right, we're recruiting drivers and now let's all get on with it. And all the local regulators are 50 steps behind as usual, saying, oh, what? You're not allowed to do that. Well, that's how Uber got away with it. But unfortunately, all the local regulators have learned their lessons now. So all the cryptocurrency equivalents that actually would be kind of for the people, because they wouldn't be taking profit, they haven't been able to take off so far. But the idea is when they eventually do take off, then their tokens, which are used within the apps themselves, become worth more and more money because people need them to buy taxis, to hire taxis, and to do the various other things that need to be done within the ecosystem of that cryptocurrency. So that's why the tokens start gaining in value. So, for example, for a taxi fare, I think a good example to use is you go to a fairground and you have to buy some tokens to go on the rides. It's kind of like that, really. So every app has its own kind of little currency, but it's not something that's going to give you a headache because all the exchanging from one currency to another is to be done automatically by your apps. It's all pretty straightforward. That's the idea. That's the dream. It's been slowly coming to fruition over the past few years in various industries. The insurance industry is another good example of an industry that could be completely disintermediated by cryptocurrencies. All you need, and again, it's being attempted by several different organizations that have been set up specifically for this purpose. You set up a cryptocurrency whereby the code determines how much people should be charged for insurance, how much a particular person should be charged, just like an actuary does these days. But it's all done automatically, and you match up buyers with sellers, effectively. And there you have an insurance industry. As I say, there are already various apps that are attempting this. So far, they haven't defeated the entire insurance industry. Will they? I hope they do, actually, because, again, the insurance industry is a huge unnecessary intermediary. So really, there are numerous examples of this. Cryptocurrency is all about disintermediating the middleman, getting rid of them and saving all the money that the middleman used to take and giving it to the consumers of whatever industry it is, and also the providers of the services, like the taxi drivers and so on. And so that's where the value lies in cryptocurrency, is in that big middle chunk. In terms of actually making money as an investor, as I say, I keep my ear to the ground, and at the beginning of a bull market, I will look at what I consider to be the most promising technologies, and the ones that have the best teams behind them, and the ones that have a website that doesn't have spelling mistakes, and basic things like that are important some of the time. And also, very importantly, to make sure that none of the people in charge of these cryptos have actually committed major scams or fraud in the past, because there are too many examples of that kind of thing. This is a new unregulated industry, so it's like the Wild West. It's got a lot of very unscrupulous operators who want to steal your money, so you have to be very careful and watch out for those, and only go to websites that are decent and have a proper, well-written white paper. Most cryptocurrencies have a white paper, which they bring out at the beginning. They call it a white, I don't know why they call it a white paper. It's usually white. But anyway, they make it look like a kind of academic study. And sometimes it has a lot of technical information in it, but it will also have information that doesn't involve equations and that ordinary people can read and understand too. So it's important to try and work your way through those white papers to make sure that a project is everything that you've been told it really is. I'll give you an example now of, just so you know what I'm talking about, of one that I invested in at a relatively young stage and that I'm still in. Because there aren't many of those. As I said, I tend to follow the cycles, and I get in and out perhaps a little bit more often than I would like when I get scared, because I'm not a perfect investor, I'm not a perfect trader. So I'll give you an example of one that I've held on to for a long time. It's called COTI, C-O-T-I, and I got interested in this a few years ago because it's trying to be a better version of Bitcoin. Bitcoin has got a lot of fundamental flaws with it. Bitcoin was the original and the best in the sense that, well, it was the best because it was the only one at the beginning. It was the original, Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever the hell he or she is, we still don't know, but they wanted to disintermediate the entire global financial system, the entire banking system, and the entire Federal Reserve System. The idea was to create a new currency that doesn't have any of the costs of those systems and simply runs itself. But the problem was that it doesn't handle enough transactions, and the transactions are too slow, and the transactions cost too much. All of these are very fundamental problems, and they are trying to solve those problems with what are called second layer solutions. It's a technical solutions, but unfortunately the ultimate sort of original design of Bitcoin doesn't allow for any sort of improvement, so you have to kind of have these add-on technologies. That's a bit of a kind of Heath Robinson type effort, not ideal. So COTI came along and said, well, we solved all these problems because we've got a better piece of technology that we've just invented. It's a bunch of Israeli blokes with really good software experience in Israel and in Tel Aviv, and they basically just came up with what I consider to be a better version of Bitcoin. I've only got 5 minutes left to talk, so I can't explain why it's a better version of Bitcoin. It's too complicated, but you can look it up. Anyway, the point is, I bought it at a low level. But I knew that, like with all cryptocurrencies, it may just completely fail. Like I said, it's like an early stage tech project. It's like being a venture capitalist. investing in some new crazy idea that some clever kids come up with. You know, it's a punt ultimately. That's what all cryptocurrencies really are. They're punts in the hope that there's a bright future that involves this particular cryptocurrency right here. And that's why it's important to identify a whole raft of them and not just invest in one, because it's incredibly easy just to invest in the wrong one. With Coty, it's gone very well so far. I've more than 50 times my original investment. In fact, it's heading up to 100 times, 100 bagger, they call it in the AIM market, don't they? So, you know, that's worked out very well for me, but some others that I invested in didn't work out so well. But here's the crucial thing, is because I have a kind of trader's mindset after trading for 20 years, I don't allow my investments to go to zero. I follow the trend. Even with Coty, I'm following the trend upwards. I'm just following the very long-term trend. So, you know, if you imagine a price chart with a series of higher highs and higher lows, like a staircase, you know, that's the ideal price chart, isn't it? Heading up to the top like that. As long as it keeps making those higher highs and the higher lows, you're okay. Your project's heading in the right direction. So with an ultra long-term buy like Coty, I was allowing it to really do a lot of upping and downing, some very serious upping and downing. But as long as the general direction was upwards, even over the very long term, I was happy. And that's why I'm still in it. Whereas various others I've sold along the way because I could see they were changing direction. They were changing their long-term direction, just like the stock market did in 2008. It's the long-term change that I'm looking out for, because that tells you there's something probably wrong with the direction of the technology or the team or something else that you don't know about. And so I got out of those, and in each and every case, the ones that I got out of because they were changing their long-term chart direction turned out to be the ones that just went to nothing, that just went to virtually zero because it turned out that the projects weren't what they were cracked up to be, which just is often the case. So that's really the basic strategy. As I say, quite similar to successful AIM investing. That's how successful AIM investors work. I know Lord Lee, who is famously Britain's first ever ISA millionaire, and he sort of invests. He became the ISA millionaire through exactly that kind of strategy, investing in small stocks on the stock market and following the very long-term trends. So even when he believes in the story of a stock, he's got profits and revenues to look at as well, so that helps. But you know, he also looks at the long-term chart and is basically looking at it and saying, okay, as long as this is heading in generally the right direction, even if it has big downs along the way, then I'm happy to keep holding. And that's what he did, and that's how he made lots of money. And that's how I make lots of money in cryptocurrency, and I think we're probably running out of time. Have I still got any more? Oh, all right, how shall I wrap up? Any question? There you go, one question. Yeah.
How does your portfolio, do you focus mainly on cryptocurrencies that are solid and asset-backed